12 world-renowned specialists stood around the grand mahogany bed, shaking their heads in defeat. The immortal Lord Anthony Cross, a ruler of the night for centuries, was fading to ash. They called it an incurable curse. But Clara, a terrified maid with a mop and a keen eye, saw the truth they were all too blind to notice. The Whitmore estate sat like a jagged crown atop the misty peaks of the Appalachian Mountains, a sprawling Gothic monstrosity hidden from the modern world. To the public, it was the private retreat of an eccentric tech billionaire. To those dwelling in the shadows, it was the seat of power for Lord Anthony Cross. Anthony was a king among his kind, a vampire whose lineage traced back through 4 centuries of European aristocracy and ruthless survival. He was feared, respected, and until recently seemingly invincible. But power, no matter how absolute, cannot stop an enemy it cannot see. It began with a subtle tremor in his hands during the winter solstice. By spring, the tremor had become a debilitating weakness. His pale porcelain skin, usually luminous and flawless, began to dry and crack like sun-baked clay. The dark, hypnotic blue of his eyes clouded over with a milky film, and the veins beneath his skin turned a sickly necrotic black. Anthony Cross, the immortal king, was dying, and no one knew why. Enter Clara Higgins. Clara was not a warrior, nor a witch, nor a supernatural scholar. She was a 23-year-old woman, drowning in crushing medical debt, desperate to keep her younger sister Lily in a specialized care facility, when a mysterious employment agency offered her an exorbitant salary to work as a specialized housekeeper at an undisclosed mountain estate. Clara didn't ask questions. She signed the airtight non-disclosure agreements, handed over her phone, and stepped into a world of monsters. Clara quickly learned the rules of the Whitmore estate: keep your head down, never look the guests in the eye, and never under any circumstances enter the East Wing after midnight. She was a ghost in a house of predators, surviving by being entirely unremarkable. But as Anthony's condition worsened, the estate was thrown into chaos. The king's most trusted advisor, Lord Alistair Reed, a vampire of chilling elegance and sharp ambition, summoned the greatest medical and supernatural minds in the world. 12 doctors were brought to the estate. Some were humans with unparalleled expertise in rare hematological diseases. Others were creatures of the night who had spent lifetimes studying the dark arts and immortal biology. There was Dr. Harrison Caldwell, a brilliant former surgeon from Johns Hopkins who had faked his own death to serve the supernatural elite. There was Dr. Leonard Croft, an ancient apothecary from London who specialized in blood-borne curses. They arrived with mobile laboratories, ancient grimoires, and egos large enough to fill the cavernous halls of the manor. Clara's duties were suddenly shifted. Because she possessed a rare O-negative blood type and an unusual resistance to vampiric compulsion, Alistair assigned her to be the primary domestic servant for the king's bedchamber. Her job was to clean the room, sterilize the medical equipment, and dispose of the biohazard waste. It was during these long, agonizing hours of cleaning that Clara first truly saw Anthony. He was not the monster the other servants whispered about. Stripped of his authority and racked with pain, he looked tragic. He lay in a massive 4-poster bed, surrounded by the beeping of heart monitors and the hum of refrigeration units, holding bags of rare, heavily fortified blood. One evening, while Clara was quietly mopping the marble floor near his bedside, a violent coughing fit seized him. Black ash-like blood spattered across the pristine white sheets. "Doctor," Caldwell, who had been reviewing a chart in the corner, barely looked up, simply barking at Clara to clean it up before the stains set. As Clara rushed over with a warm, damp cloth, Anthony's trembling hand shot out and caught her wrist. His grip was weak, a mere shadow of his former strength, but his clouded eyes locked onto hers. "I apologize for the mess," Anthony whispered, his voice like grinding stones, yet laced with a startling, heartbreaking courtesy. Clara froze. In her 3 months at the estate, no vampire had ever spoken to her with anything resembling humanity, let alone apologized. "It's my job, sir," she murmured, her heart hammering against her ribs. She gently pulled her wrist away, but the lingering coldness of his touch sent a strange jolt of electricity through her. From that moment on, Clara couldn't help but watch him. She watched as he bravely endured the excruciating treatments the doctors subjected him to. She watched as his pride waged a losing war against his failing body. And most importantly, she began to watch the 12 doctors. The medical intervention was a spectacle of arrogance and desperation. The 12 specialists formed a sort of round-table council in the library directly beneath Anthony's chambers, debating his fate while sipping vintage scotch. Dr. Caldwell was convinced it was a mutated strain of a modern pathogen specifically targeting the vampire genome. He ordered massive transfusions of synthetic hyperoxygenated plasma laced with broad-spectrum antibiotics. Clara watched as bag after bag of this glowing, viscous fluid was pumped into Anthony's veins. The result, a violent seizure that nearly broke the king's spine, leaving him weaker than before. Dr. Croft, the ancient apothecary, scoffed at Caldwell's modern medicine. He insisted Anthony was the victim of an archaic blood curse originating from a rival clan in Eastern Europe. Croft's treatment involved burning noxious, suffocating incense made from crushed bone and dead nettle, while feeding Anthony a tincture of pulverized meteorites and wolfsbane. Clara, forced to stand in the corner with a silver tray of bandages, watched Anthony gag and choke on the foul liquid. When Croft demanded the king swallow more, Anthony's eyes rolled back in agony. "Stop!" The word tore from Clara's throat before she could stop herself. The entire room went dead silent. "Doctor," Croft turned slowly, his eyes flashing a dangerous predatory yellow. "What did you say, human?" Clara trembled, clutching the silver tray to her chest like a shield. "He's choking. You're drowning him. Can't you see he can't swallow?" Before Croft could lunge at her, a low, dangerous growl echoed from the bed. Anthony had pushed himself up on one elbow, his fangs fully descended, despite his weakness. "She is right," he rasped, glaring at Croft. "Get out, all of you. Leave me." The doctors bristled, but retreated, muttering about the stubbornness of dying kings. Alistair Reed, standing by the doorway, gave Clara a long, unreadable look before following them out. Alone in the vast, dim room, Anthony collapsed back onto the pillows, his chest heaving. Clara rushed to his side, pouring a glass of clean, cool water, ignoring the strict orders that he was only to consume blood. She carefully lifted his head and let him drink. "You are very brave, Clara," he murmured, leaning into the warmth of her hand as she wiped the dark residue from his chin. He knew her name. The realization made her breath catch. "They aren't looking at you, my lord," Clara said softly, her voice trembling. "They're looking at their charts, their books, their own reflections, but they aren't looking at you." As the weeks dragged on, the doctors grew increasingly desperate. They tried everything: ultraviolet light therapy, filtered through ancient runic stones, transfusions from immortal royalty, flown in from Paris, and even dark magic rituals that left the air in the room tasting like ozone and copper. Nothing worked. Anthony's skin grew more translucent, revealing the darkened, dying vascular system beneath. His periods of lucidity became shorter. The 12 doctors finally convened and drafted a grim consensus. The king's body was rejecting all sustenance. His cellular regeneration had failed. He had at most a week to live. Alistair Reed began making quiet preparations for a transition of power, his grief seemingly overshadowed by the logistical nightmares of a vampiric succession. But Clara refused to accept it. She spent every waking moment in Anthony's room. She noticed things the doctors missed, because she was the one changing the sheets, scrubbing the floors, and handling the medical waste. She was a girl who had grown up fixing broken washing machines with duct tape and keeping her sick sister alive on a shoestring budget. She knew how to look at the practical pieces of a puzzle. The doctors assumed the problem was massive, complex, and deeply magical. But Clara began to notice a pattern, a tiny, mundane detail that was hiding in plain sight. It started with the blood bags. Anthony was being fed the highest quality human blood, sourced from elite willing donors who were kept on strict organic diets. The blood was drawn, processed in the estate's state-of-the-art subterranean lab, and then brought up in sterile, vacuum-sealed bags. One night, while organizing the medical cart, Clara accidentally dropped one of the empty bags. As she knelt to pick it up, she caught a faint scent. It wasn't the smell of blood. It was a sharp, metallic tang, slightly bitter like an old, tarnished coin. Clara frowned, bringing the plastic bag closer to her nose. She had spent 2 years working as a silversmith's apprentice before the medical bills forced her to quit. She knew the smell of metals intimately. She walked over to the refrigeration unit and pulled out a fresh, sealed bag of blood. She uncapped the port and sniffed. There it was again, extremely faint, masked by the heavy iron scent of the blood, but undeniable. Her heart began to race. She looked over at Anthony, who was currently sleeping, his breathing shallow and erratic. She looked at his black veins. She looked at the crackling skin. Silver. Silver was highly toxic to vampires, acting as a slow-moving necrotic poison. But how could silver be in the medical-grade blood? The doctors were rigorously testing the blood for pathogens, magical tampering, and nutritional density. But they were using advanced supernatural metrics. Were they missing a basic elemental poison because it was introduced after the testing phase? Clara's hand shook as she realized the terrifying implication. The doctors couldn't cure him because the treatment itself was killing him. And someone in this house, someone with high enough clearance to access the secure blood supply, was doing it on purpose. The revelation struck Clara with the force of a physical blow. Silver, the ancient elemental enemy of the vampire race, was being drip-fed directly into the king's bloodstream. It was a method so thoroughly modern, so devastatingly mundane, that the supernatural specialists and brilliant surgeons had looked right past it. They were searching for complex curses and mutated pathogens, blinded by their own advanced expertise. Clara needed proof. If she went to the 12 doctors with a hunch based on a smell, they would have her thrown out of the estate, or worse, handed over to Alistair Reed for discipline. She had to be absolutely certain before she spoke a word of this to Anthony. That night, after her shift ended, Clara did not return to her cramped quarters in the servants' wing. Instead, she stole a heavy iron master key from the laundry supervisor's desk and slipped into the labyrinthine corridors leading down to the estate's subterranean medical center. The basement was a marvel of sterile clinical efficiency. Stainless steel counters gleamed under harsh fluorescent lights, and rows of massive refrigeration units hummed loudly, storing the lifeblood of the estate. Clara crept past the security desk, mercifully empty, while the night guards performed their perimeter rounds and slipped into the primary blood processing lab. She quickly booted up one of the peripheral terminals. Using the guest access credentials she had memorized over a security guard's shoulder weeks ago, she accessed the supply manifests. Her eyes scanned the spreadsheets, searching for anything anomalous. Then she found it. 3 months ago, precisely when Anthony's mysterious illness had begun, the estate had abruptly changed its supplier for the specialized vacuum-sealed intravenous blood bags. The previous contract with a reputable vampire-run pharmaceutical firm in Geneva had been terminated by none other than Lord Alistair Reed. The new supplier was a domestic shell company listed as Apex Medical Solutions. Clara printed the manifest, her hands trembling. To confirm her horrific theory, she approached the nearest refrigerator, pulled out a fresh blood bag with the Apex logo, and took it to the chemical testing station. She didn't need a medical degree. Her years as a silversmith's apprentice had taught her the basic acid test for silver. She drew a tiny sample of the blood, placed it in a glass beaker, and added a few drops of nitric acid from the lab's supply. If the liquid turns, a cloudy, milky white silver is present. Clara held her breath as the acid mixed with the red fluid. Slowly, insidiously, a milky white precipitate formed at the bottom of the beaker. The bags weren't just holding blood. Their interior plastic was lined with a microscopic layer of silver nitrate. It was a slow, undetectable assassination. Suddenly, the heavy pneumatic doors of the lab hissed open. Clara threw herself beneath the steel counters, clutching the printed manifest to her chest. Footsteps echoed on the tile. 2 men entered the room. Clara recognized the polished leather shoes of Alistair Reed and the heavy work boots of Gregory Hayes, the head technician of the blood bank. The doctors are finalizing their death certificates. Alistair's voice floated through the cold air, smooth as silk and dripping with venom. They estimate he will turn to ash by tomorrow night. Are all the remaining Apex bags disposed of? Yes, my lord, Gregory replied nervously. I incinerated the last batch an hour ago. Once the king is gone, we switch back to the Geneva supplier. No one will ever know. The doctors are entirely convinced it was a cellular rejection cascade. Excellent. You have done well, Gregory. When I take the throne, your loyalty will be rewarded. Clara clamped her hand over her mouth to stifle a gasp. The sheer audacity of the betrayal made her stomach churn. Alistair wasn't just planning for a succession, he had manufactured it. She waited in agonizing silence for 20 minutes after they left, before bolting from the lab. She bypassed the servant stairs entirely, running directly up to the forbidden east wing. She burst into Anthony's bedchamber. The room was dark, smelling of ozone and impending death. Anthony lay motionless, his skin cracked and weeping black fluid. The heart monitor beeped with a terrifying lethargic slowness. My lord, Clara whispered, dropping to her knees beside his bed. She grabbed his cold, trembling hand. Anthony, wake up, please. His eyelids fluttered, revealing the milky ruin of his once hypnotic blue eyes. Clara. He rasped his voice, barely a breath. You shouldn't be here. The end is not a pretty sight. You are not dying of an illness, Clara said fiercely, tears finally spilling over her cheeks. She slammed the printed manifest onto the bedside table. You are being murdered. Alistair changed the blood bags. They're lined with silver nitrate. The 12 doctors, they missed it because it's not magic or a disease. It's poison. Anthony's body tensed. A flicker of the ancient, terrifying predator ignited in his clouded eyes. But the spark quickly faded, drowned by immense physical weakness. Alistair, he whispered, a horrific laugh escaping his cracked lips. My oldest friend, and I am too weak to tear his throat out. Clara's observations versus the specialist's diagnosis, physical symptom, the 12 doctors' diagnosis, Clara's true discovery, blackening veins, ancient Eastern European blood curse, classic silver necrosis in vampires, violent seizures, rejection of hyperoxygenated plasma, acute toxic reaction to silver nitrate, dry, ashen skin, fatal cellular breakdown / genome failure, severe dehydration from heavy metal poisoning, milky eyesight, neurological magic decay, Silver deposits building in the ocular vessels. You need clean blood, Clara said, her voice dropping to a determined, urgent whisper. Pure blood, untouched by plastic or lab technicians. You need to flush the silver out of your system. The reserves are tainted, Anthony choked out. Not all of them, Clara said. Without a second thought, she unbuttoned the cuffs of her uniform, rolling up her sleeve to expose her pale, fragile wrist. She pressed it directly against Anthony's cracked lips. I am O negative. I'm clean. Drink. Anthony tried to turn his head away, a final act of nobility. No. I will drain you. I am starving. I survived a lifetime of debt collectors and broken hospitals. Anthony, Clara said, her voice hard as steel. I am not fragile. Drink or Alistair wins. Drink and take your throne back. With a low, desperate groan, Anthony yielded. His fangs descended, extending past his bottom lip. He caught her wrist, his grip suddenly possessing a fraction of his old terrifying strength, and sank his teeth into her flesh. The pain was immediate and blinding. Clara gasped, her knees buckling, as a fiery ache shot up her arm. But as Anthony drank, the pain morphed into a strange, heavy euphoria, the natural anesthetic of a vampire's bite. She watched in awe as the transformation began. It wasn't instantaneous, but it was undeniable. As her warm, untainted human blood flooded his severely compromised system, the thick, toxic blackness in Anthony's veins began to dilute. The erratic, dying rhythm of the heart monitor steadily picked up pace, transforming from a lethargic trudge into a strong, vital drumming. Anthony drank deeply, his body violently purging the silver through his sweat. The cracked, clay-like texture of his skin began to soften the severe ash tone, giving way to the pale, luminous perfection of his immortal nature. After what felt like an eternity, Anthony abruptly pulled back. He was panting, his chest heaving, but the milky film had entirely vanished from his eyes. They were a piercing, vibrant sapphire blue, once more locking on to Clara with an intensity that stole the breath from her lungs. Clara swayed dizzily, the blood loss hitting her all at once. Before she could hit the marble floor, Anthony caught her. He lifted her effortlessly, his unnatural strength fully restored, and laid her gently onto the velvet settee across the room. He bit his own wrist, smearing a drop of his now purified immortal blood over the puncture wounds on her arm. They sealed instantly, leaving only 2 faint pink scars. You have given me my life, Clara, Anthony said, his voice vibrating with a rich, dark power that she had never heard before. He knelt beside her, lifting her hand and pressing his lips to her knuckles. And you have given me my vengeance. Alistair thinks you will be ash by tomorrow night, Clara whispered, her head spinning but her mind razor-sharp. The doctors are coming to pronounce you dead. A terrifying, beautiful smile spread across the king's face. Then we mustn't disappoint them. We must give them a show. For the next 24 hours, Clara and Anthony set their trap. Clara hid in the adjacent dressing room, continuing to secretly supply Anthony with smaller, controlled feeds from her arm to rapidly accelerate his healing while maintaining the illusion of his impending death. Anthony used his centuries of discipline to slow his newly revived heart rate and mask his aura, lying perfectly still beneath the sheets. At midnight, the heavy oak doors to the bedchamber swung open. The 12 doctors filed in, looking solemn and exhausted. Dr. Harrison Caldwell carried a leather-bound death ledger, while Dr. Leonard Croft held a silver urn ready to collect the royal ashes. Trailing behind them was Alistair Reed. He was already dressed in mourning attire, a sharply tailored black suit, his face set in a perfect mask of tragic grief. His life signs have faded entirely, Dr. Caldwell murmured, looking at the silent, dark heart monitor that Clara had secretly disconnected an hour prior. The cellular breakdown is complete. A tragedy, Alistair said, smoothly stepping toward the bed. A king cut down in his prime by a curse we could not understand. I shall assume the regency immediately to maintain order in the dark world. You always were impatient, Alistair. A cold, resonant voice echoed through the chamber. The 12 doctors froze. Dr. Croft dropped the silver urn. It hit the marble floor with a deafening clatter. Alistair's eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated terror. Slowly the heavy velvet blankets were pushed aside. Anthony Cross rose from the bed. He was not a rotting corpse. He was a terrifying vision of immortal power, dressed in a loose linen shirt, his skin flawless, his eyes burning with predatory fury. My lord, Dr. Caldwell stammered, backing away so fast he crashed into a medical tray. This is impossible. Your genome was collapsing. My genome is perfectly fine. Harrison, Anthony said, stepping off the bed. His bare feet made no sound on the marble. However, my choice in advisors was severely flawed. Alistair lunged for the door, his vampire speed a blur. But Anthony was older, stronger, and fueled by pure, unadulterated rage. In a fraction of a second, Anthony crossed the room and slammed Alistair against the reinforced oak doors. The wood splintered under the impact. Anthony's hand wrapped around his traitorous friend's throat, lifting him 3 feet off the ground. Silver nitrate in the blood supply. Anthony hissed his fangs, fully extended his eyes, boring into Alistair's panicked face. A human maid deduced in 3 months what 12 of the greatest medical minds in our world failed to see. Anthony turned his burning gaze toward the huddled, trembling group of doctors. You looked at charts. You looked at magic. You looked everywhere but at the truth. Get out of my house. All of you. The doctors didn't need to be told twice. They scrambled over each other to escape the room, leaving their equipment behind. Clara stepped out of the shadows of the dressing room, her head held high. She watched as Anthony dealt the final, lethal blow to Alistair, snapping the traitor's neck with a sickening crunch and tossing the body aside like a broken doll. The room fell dead silent. The threat was eliminated. The estate was his once more. Anthony turned away from the body, the fury melting from his features as he looked at Clara. He walked toward her, bridging the gap between monster and mortal king and servant. Alistair's wealth and properties are now forfeit to the crown, Anthony said softly, stopping mere inches from her. He reached up gently, tucking a stray lock of hair behind her ear. I will have your sister Lily moved to the finest private medical facility in Switzerland by morning. All of your debts are erased. Clara looked up at him, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Thank you, my lord. No, Anthony corrected his voice, dropping to a low, intimate murmur. He knelt on one knee amidst the wreckage of the room, taking her scarred hand in both of his. It is I who thank you. You saw me when no one else did, Clara. You saved the king. Now, the king is asking if you will stay by his side. Not as a servant, but as my equal. Clara looked at the immortal predator kneeling before her, seeing past the terrifying power to the deep, unwavering loyalty beneath. She didn't hesitate. I'll stay, she whispered, and in the shadows of the Whitmore estate, a new reign began. The truth is finally out. Clara didn't just save the vampire king. She exposed a deadly treason that 12 brilliant doctors missed entirely. From a desperate, debt-ridden maid to a powerful queen, her keen eye changed the fate of the supernatural world forever. Did you expect Alistair's ruthless betrayal? If you loved this dark, romantic thrill ride, smash that, Like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this video with your fellow vampire lore fans. See you in the next story.